Well, for more on how this has impacted the commodity sector, I'm joined by Jonathan Barratt from Commodity Broking Services. Jonathan Barratt, welcome to Business Today.
Good morning, Whitney.
Now, we've seen a spike in wheat prices due to heat waves in Russia and Europe. How concerning is this?
Oh, Whitney, it is concerning. It's concerning across the board. When you look at a market that's been relatively stable for the last 12 to 18 months, to all of a sudden see an increase in the last month and a half of close to 40 or even up to 50% is quite astronomical, and I think the repercussions for it will be felt further down the track.
There's also been some speculation that US hedge funds have been pushing up the price that's driven by a lack of supply. What are your thoughts on that?
Look, I think it's generally the US hedge funds, when they see a movement in any market across the board, it provides them with a buy signal, and that buy signal means that they've got to do the best for their investors, so they actually go into the market as well. One of the concerns is, as a consequence of this additional volume, prices and liquidity dries up, and that has the effect of pushing prices even higher. So that in itself and their involvement in these, particularly the primary import markets of grain, is a concern.
So given that this is a supply-driven rally, is it likely that prices are set to stay high for some time?
I think that's the actual key. I think that's the message. When you look at where the prices have been historically, we're really only 50% off their highs. So I can see that given the continuance of concerns on weather around the world, that these prices will remain well supported on any dip. So I think we've got to get used to paying extra pennies for our Wheaties every morning. So,
where do you see these prices settling then?
Look, I think at the moment, particularly in Australia, I think we're looking at about $300 a tonne. When you look at the CBOT, anything can happen, but I think dips will be supported. That will be the benchmark and the leader. And while we've got this concern out there in the market, I can still see prices moving higher. And I would say that if they came back, investors would only come back into the market and buy it.
All right, now Australia's wheat exports to China have jumped to their highest level in 5 years. That provides some relief for farmers in the country, doesn't it?
Well, it's not too bad actually, because the farmers have had big concerns, particularly on the eastern seaboard over the last 7 or 8 years. And we've actually got good rains at the moment, and we should have good production this year. It is a little bit of concern more over into the west, where they've had bumper crops, but this year doesn't look to be as good as previous years. But overall, I think from the farming sector, I think this is looking quite positive.
All right, moving on to another issue, Jonathan Barratt, and that's those floods in China. How badly have they affected rice production?
Look, I think when you look at rice, Whitney, and where it's been trading, it's actually been very low for a very, very long time. Particularly with the floods in China, we can see probably losing between 5 and 10% of production. And I think to me that is a concern and should see prices in rice start to rise. In fact, they've already up by about 5 to 6% over the last week. And I think as it becomes more visual, there is more of an immediate concern, because the volatility in the rice market is such that it can move very fast, very quickly.
And given its importance as a food source, what sort of reaction will there be to this then?
Well, I think you've already seen it in some of the news items where, farmers or institutions holding back grain will be dealt with severely by a lot of the authorities. And I think that this is the message that we get, that if people start to stockpile this grain rather than putting it onto the markets, then there is a concern, because that only aids the fact that prices will continue to trade higher.
Now, China is the world's largest rice grower, so where will their prices land?
Look, I think it's hard to say. We don't actually know the full extent of their ending stocks or what they've got in store. If it's ample enough, we should be okay. Remember, we're only anticipating 5 to 10% loss of production. So if anything, everything looks to be okay from what we can see, but obviously we don't see the actual results and what stocks they've actually got on board. So it's a little bit of a hard question.
And what about forward selling? Has that boosted prices as well?
Look, no, there's actually not a lot of forward sales out there at the moment, particularly that we're seeing in rice. Certainly in wheat, a lot of farmers are locking it in. That might dampen expectations, but I think there's a very, very, very hungry market looking to buy it. So I certainly think any sales will be well and truly lapped up.
Will there be a switch to other staples, food staples, given that rice, is becoming pricier?
Oh, look, I think you will. One of the big crops which we look at is the soybeans, particularly in China. And soybean in itself is one of the largest crops in America as well, and America actually exports a lot to China. China is not really self-sufficient in this commodity. So if there is that switch to other foodstuffs, whether it's soybeans or corn, then you should see it actually gravitate higher if the price of some of these other staples start to move higher as well. So you can actually see the development of the whole complex actually moving higher over time.
All right, Jonathan Barratt, thanks for joining the program.
Thanks, Whitney.